Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to the Cabinet meeting of December the 14th with emergency. Any apologies for absence? I have received two apologies, Councillor Luke Spillman and Councillor Andrew Jeffries. Any others? Thank you very much. Matters of urgent business to be resolved at this meeting. Is there any matters? I have none. No. Declaration of interest. Is there any declarations of interest for the matter tonight? No. Statements by myself. Oh, yep. Thank you very much. I'm glad that we're all back here to discuss the Q2 financial report. The corporate ONS had their time to provide comments, which I think was on the desks. We'll go into that later. Thank you for that. I must thank you, the chair, and all members then. Today is a day that we put forward all details of the financial position out in the open, and frankly, this picture is very grim. I'm determined to make the tough decisions and carve a way out for a bright future for the council and make it the best it can be. So I believe today it's appropriate for me to announce that on Monday I received a letter of resignation from the Chief Executive, Lynn Carpenter, which I accepted with immediate effect. Looking forward, I'm recruiting a substantive Chief Executive in the new year. Also on that point, last week I signed an executive decision to accelerate the recruitment process of an interim director to improve the environmental department and make sure the bins are collected, every bin's collected. And I look forward for Anita starting work for us after Christmas. Thank you very much. Briefings and policy and from other issues. No. Petitions from members?
None received, Leader.
Thank you very much. Questions from non-executive members? Any questions? No. And then I will move to matters for consideration from overviewing scrutiny. I think that will come through in the documents that I've got in front of me, but I think we'll do that with item 9. So I'll move on to item 9, financial update. Great, Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Leader. I'll start by saying that this report has been prepared and agreed with the Commissioners, and it updates Cabinet on the latest financial position for 22-23 and the medium-term outlook. As we all know by now, this report highlights a significant deterioration in the financial position previously reported on the 12th of October following the intervention by the Secretary of State. A great deal of work has been done to identify the impairment on major investments due to the deterioration in their valuation, revenue impacts of compliance with the Prudential Code, notably on MRP, refinancing debt and other underlying pressures. As a result, there is a projected in-year deficit of 469.581 million, which is reduced by mitigation measures to 452.38 million, as demonstrated by the table on page 6. And there's an estimated structural deficit in 23-24 of 184.381 million, as we can see on page 7. As the Leader has just suggested, this is a grave financial position, and the Council cannot, at this juncture, achieve a balanced budget for 23-24 without external financial support. Therefore, a request to the Secretary of State for exceptional financial support will need to be made. Also, the Section 151 officer will need to consider further actions within Thurrock to restrict expenditure, and an exercise has commenced to identify opportunities for capital receipts to be generated through disposal of assets. It is important to note at this point that our statutory and contractual commitments will continue to be met as we go through this process. To delve into the figures a little bit more detail, the table on page 6 is a summary of the general fund outturn at Q2. These are the known positions to date, but the MRP remains under assessment and subject to further change. The potential asset sales are also subject to further assessment and will be updated in due course. What is clearly shown is the write-down of 4 investment assets of 275.373 million. The impact of the provision for the write-down of the remaining investments over their lives is 129.241 million, and increased pressure on the treasury position, which is 33.268 million current year and 29.927 million previous year, which reflects the projected loss of income from specific investments and the increased borrowing costs associated with them. It is important to note that the potential mitigation based on a combination of available reserves and capital receipts from projected asset disposals is likely to change, and the first is subject to closure of prior year audits, and the latter the basis of a capitalisation direction from the government. On page 7 of the report, we have the table setting out an update for the projected MTFS for 23-24. As you can see, it also shows significant funding gaps. You will note a total funding gap of 184.381 million is 120% of the 22-23 net expenditure budget. However, this position assumes that investments are retained along with the associated costs of that, but we fully intend to divest ourselves of the investments, and that will lead to a reduction of debt and treasury costs. That's not yet been worked through the MTFS, and indeed work is ongoing and updates will be brought to Cabinet as and when. I think I'll leave it there for now, but I just want to reiterate that these figures are, if you will, a snapshot of the financial position now for this report. They are subject to change, and as we work through this process, updates will be brought to Cabinet when it is practical to do so. I'll leave it there for now and open to questions.
Any questions from members?
Sorry, Leader, I was just going to ask if we're going to go through some of the answers to the questions from overview and scrutiny, then I haven't got a question because my question is sort of within there as well.
Yeah, I was going to raise one of the. I think the questions were answered, and there was the committee agreed with all the recommendations here. But there was comments that the comments on the financial report. I was proud. Went to the meeting, listened to the members, and I was quite helpful. I think them questions were incisive and understanding. I went through and I pick out one of the questions that were answered on there, which I thought that I didn't need to make a further, was the council question about public loans well from Councillor Kent, and about the auditors and the diligence and the processes around that, and what happened. And I spoke to the commissioners yesterday, and I've spoken to the chief executive about how we can go forward that and find more details of that and make sure that item of workload needs to be processed a bit further. And there is something coming out. I think the questions were answered in the minutes of the meetings of these, were quite helpfully by Jonathan. But I don't know if you had any more comments, Jonathan, around some of the questions to the Cabinet members who weren't there.
From the ONS committee, Leader. So a portion of the questions were really about clarification of what things mean. So a capitalisation direction, a section 114 notice, and just a helpful content for members at the meeting. I think then the impact of things like the 114 notice were considered. There's obviously a range of comment on the scale of the issue and the future actions, the exceptional support. But there was no, it was mostly around clarification and, that future action that stems from the report itself with that combined clarification. There was further comment about the complexity of the report and how that could potentially be simplified for members going forward. But the minutes of the committee have been circulated to members with the responses to those comments. But I'm happy if any member's got a specific further clarification on those points to answer.
Thank you. Well, I would just state that obviously as we move forward here tonight, it's going to be this is not the end of the issue. I think the issue is that I'm looking for when would the Q3 would we be still on for a Q3 notice, because this is very late, this Q2 now. Would that be still coming? And I don't know, Councillor Snell or to answer the Q3 notice.
So Q2 normally comes in December, so it's not any later than it normally is. I think probably because there's a focus on the figures that are within this one particularly, and obviously there's been a build-up of work to get to the point we've got to. It's probably felt like it's perhaps been longer coming. But quarter two has always come, it's always quarter 1 September, 2 December, and quarter 3 always comes in February. So we are sticking to that timetable. I don't know if you remember, we considered deferring Q1 at one point because we could see the scale of issues that were coming for Q2. But we did bring that in the end. But we will certainly look to bring forward as soon as possible, but we're obviously aligning with the Cabinet meetings as they're currently planned.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Any other questions?
Sorry, picking up with, just catching up with some of that's in here about if there's an S114 notice, does that mean the council would retreat to statutory minimums? Because within adult social care, some of our non-discretionary, non-statutory items and services are what actually stop us going into more acute spending in other areas. So does it mean that we still get that leeway, or you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the 114 obviously brings a requirement to minimise spend. The process to do so is obviously a panel process that essentially 3 levels of panel, so at directorate level, corporate level and strategic level, and essentially spend will come through that process for assessment. Now, obviously statutory services are protected in a 114 notice, so and then what you're referring to is preventative work, I think, that sits alongside the statutory duties, and I think there is also a best value responsibility. So if preventative work is considered in a best value interest, basically to prevent further cost arising in the core services, obviously decisions can be made to protect the council's future financial position by making decisions that support that. So I think the mechanism is essentially to ensure spend is assessed appropriately and that need is considered appropriately. It's not to make decisions that would significantly impact and make worse the future financial position of the council. So.
Did that answer sufficient? I had one question. There was another question that would come up. We announced that KPMG are in leading the sale of these assets, and you mentioned hopefully within 2 years. Is there any light that you can give to Cabinet that has any conversations?
Yes, so obviously the Toucan assets within the administrative process, we met administrators last week. Obviously it's still quite early in the process, but they have taken that step, as you mentioned, to appoint what they call an M&A agent to sell the Toucan assets. KPMG were actually familiar with the assets. They actually were involved in the sale of those assets previously, so they've got a good starting point in terms of knowledge. They obviously know the market. It's a significant portfolio they're identifying. It's quite rare a portfolio of this size comes to market, was another comment, and they are engaged with players in the market essentially that they consider potential buyers of an asset of that scale. The asset is considered attractive in the market, but obviously it's very early days and we will seek further updates from the administrator.
Thank you. I mentioned that because the faster this happens within the 2 years, the numbers and the figures go drastically down as we divest ourselves of that asset, which we must stick to the principles and that we were given by the Secretary of State, and we'll pay this down. It's quite sensible to protect the Thurrock taxpayers. That's what we're sitting here for, any undue costs, and if we reduce our borrowings as quick as possible, so the quicker we can move to that asset sale. And I'm glad to hear that it's still a very good asset and able to be. I was glad to see the comments from the administrators earlier this month. Any others? Comments? Councillor Hewning.
Arnold. Yeah, it's not a question, but more of a comment. around recommendation 1.5 and what we've been talking about Cabinet and directors taking ownership together of, we've got to make some savings, we understand that, we've got to help with those pressures. So like within adult social care, our pressures, we know some of them have come post-COVID for how things have changed, how around mental health and stuff, and costs are going up because of that. So I think for me as a Cabinet member, helping to take ownership of that is getting a greater understanding. Now we've got to go more in depth in things. So in the new year, I'll be taking a keen interest in visiting and going out and actually making my own personal training and commitment to understanding mental health better post-COVID to see, and with services, what we can actually achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bess.
Thank you for your report, Councillor, and thank you, for answering certain questions. At 1.5, it says there will be further actions required to identify further savings. So can you please identify what further savings does this mean?
So obviously we've got a funding gap which includes an operational gap, and we would always have been identifying savings. So obviously the scale of the problem is sufficient that we need to look at all options and extend that. That work is going on, so directors are considering those options and continuing to consider those options, because this has been kind of live for the whole year actually. And those options will crystallise into a proposed savings programme for next year shortly. That will come back through Cabinet. So that will take us into 23-4. There's a wider piece of work on the wider transformation of the council. So there's more significant transformative activities, such as obviously further consideration of placement spend, which will also fall out of the panels that I mentioned earlier. So we will have a placement panel looking at panel spend specifically, but obviously that is a significant area of spend of the council, and under the new rules, under the spending panel, will come into a specific focus, but also as a key proportion of our budget, any action taken makes a significant difference in there. We've got to manage that alongside inevitably increased growth for that service, so it's a combination of the two things. We've also got the number of front doors people access the council through. That's an ongoing discussion, so that would be another piece of that larger work where we're trying to streamline how people access the council, and as a result creating that transformation that reduces the financial pressure on the council. Those larger pieces of work are obviously more significant at an earlier stage, and you would expect those to come back forward through into 24-5 and beyond. And then, as with every council every year, we're all managing inflationary pressures, pay pressures, and all of the demand costs that we normally manage. And we've also got to look at the normal savings programme that extends beyond into future years as well. Obviously, that's an ongoing process, and we've got to very much, what's helpful in this, I think, is that we've added a transformation process, which hopefully will lead the transformation team to lead that savings programme as we go into next year, and what we call delivery risk assess it, so that we've got an assurance from day one on the deliverability of savings, and then we've got an ongoing monitoring process thereafter, so that you as portfolio holders can take assurance on where the delivery of those savings are. And we obviously had some conversations previously where that hasn't always been the case, and some of that has sat perhaps with the financial monitoring where it's identified problems later. This should sit on top of that and support that process as well.
Councillor Bess.
Thank you for your answer. Further on this, obviously, as you have mentioned, this work is going on, we are exploring different options. So does this mean these figures mentioned in different pages will change before we make Section 114 notice?
Not before the 114 notice. That quarter 2 position is the basis for the position we're in. The seeking exceptional support and confirms we cannot balance our budget, which is the key driver for the 114. it's obviously so far from balancing the budget that there's nothing that's going to change between now and the 114. But the quarterly reporting is an iterative process. As we've mentioned earlier, Q3 will come back. There will be further movement. We'll have further assessment of value of assets. We'll have further assessments on the tail of investments, for example. And obviously, we continue to monitor the operating position. So all of those things remain live as they do every year. But obviously, we're dealing with some significant pressures in specific areas that Councillor Snell has run through as the key points in that around the investments, and we need to continue to monitor that. I think in terms of the risk in that investment area, I think the quantum of what's being reflected to date is at least the majority of it, but the tail of investments need that final review. We know there's potential pressure in one other investment, for example, but we're yet to quantify it, and that work is ongoing. So we will have that. What I would say is it's not going to change significantly what we're reporting to date. We are talking about a much smaller pool of assets left, and in most cases, first impressions, certainly from the initial review, is that there's a lot more stability in those remaining tail assets, but there's one particularly that we're looking at.
Councillor Johnson, or Councillor Best?
Just minor clarification. You know, on page 2, it says like prior year investment income losses. You know, so why are we considering prior year's income losses in this Q2?
Thank you, Councillor. So the reason for that is that the situation has evolved on investments. The largest part of that is relating to the solar asset. When that asset went into administration, I don't know if you remember, what we had funding locked inside the bank account specifically, and the purpose of that was obviously to ensure that funding stayed within the company, pending it coming to the council thereafter. So that funding was being held, and then the company went into administration. That funding's still there inside administration, but obviously we can't tell you exactly now when that will be distributed. When we get more certainty from the administration process, that will help us with that one. But similarly, there was one or two of the investments where clearly now we understand what was going on to try and rectify the position, but the income that associated to those investments is now not going to be received. And remember, we're still open on the 2021 audit. So in 21-2, we haven't even got into that process yet, and we were still awaiting clarification on what and if to accrue for income, and we're now clear where we sit with those investments. So we're reflecting that as well and just updating the position to capture that and make sure. And remember, we've not reported anything prior year, if it's only been identified to date, hasn't yet been reported to central government, hasn't been reported to you as members. So when we identify that, we have to bring that to you and confirm the position has changed and this is the new position. And similarly, with the support as a whole, when we get to the total figure, again, some of that, as we've said previously, will inevitably attach back into previous years. But we are going to government now and saying this is the gap we've identified with all these things, and therefore that's the support we need. So we kind of accumulate everything into this one pot for management accounts. When we ultimately do our financial accounts, we will attach it back against relevant years in agreement with the auditors.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. We obviously have a much clearer picture of where we are now, and both the Leader and the portfolio have said it is pretty dire, and hopefully the BVI investigation will give us a much better idea of how we got here. But I think everybody knows that we do have to have a culture change here, and that culture change has got to be around the way we do things. We have to do things differently. I'm happy that I've seen some reports that do look as though we're doing that. I mean, I've spoken to people about it, and I do feel I'm going to have to use the word happy again. I can't think of a better one. That I'm happy that we are going the right way, and I think that will obviously go to help that last question that's on this from the ONS scrutiny, saying how can we ensure that this won't happen again? I mean, I'm happy we're on that route. Are you?
Yeah, we're obviously, as you know, with the BVI and an intervention in parallel, we're going through a huge amount of change and developing an entire improvement plan. obviously the first part of that improvement plan is the response to the financial intervention, essentially. So we are working obviously very directly with commissioners, as Councillor Snell mentioned. Commissioners supported this report, they've supported all the reports since intervention, and we are seeking assurance through that reporting all the way through to make sure that you as members obviously are engaged leading up to this meeting, to make sure you're informed to then ask these questions at this meeting. And overall, I think the processes are continuing to evolve. We are obviously having to then navigate the situation of exceptional support and a 114. So we are doing that in parallel. But ultimately, we've got specific issues around investments that we are tackling, and you can see them being tackled directly in this report. But alongside that, we are making assessments of the wider financial portfolio, whether that's the savings targets we've all been talking about, the capital programme, whether that's the reserve strategy that will come forward. We're obviously looking at the Treasury supporting strategies and updating those in parallel with this. We've obviously in this report referenced an updated MRP policy. So I think in terms of the processes, absolutely, definitely the case. Absolutely appreciate the comment made both last week at ONS and you're making today. We have to continue to build these processes and re-establish that assurance level from yourselves, and the team are doing everything they can to do that. We have to accept alongside that this issue has inevitably created a lack of trust in officers, and obviously my job is to come and pick this up and try and provide that assurance to you. And hopefully my personal feeling is that one of the things that I think we've really tackled and improved in conjunction with commissioners, and it's been really interesting to sort of pick up how Essex deal with particularly their member engagement, and that engagement through key decisions has obviously been very clear from going through and working through the investment decisions, working through this report, working through what will become the MTFS and the request for support, to make sure you're all informed and understand and can ask all the questions you need to ask, and also receive the information and the technical information that you need. I do appreciate, as Councillor Arnold has flagged a couple of times, that some of these things are really technical. It can be quite difficult to explain some of these things, and we're trying to reflect on that, as I said to ONS, to make sure that the reporting sort of works for this forum in the technical detail that's needed, but also works for members in other forums, and certainly where clarification is needed. So I'm happy with where we are in terms of the process. I'm not happy with where we are in terms of the scale of the issue we have to deal with, as I said last week. But we've just got to continue on this path, and I think I'm hoping that members feel that there's certainly a much greater engagement and understanding of the data.
Thank you. I may just say that as well. I've heard me a few times talk about cultural change, and it's about changing that. And there is a senior leadership with myself and the acting chief executive. The culture, sometimes the culture is the wrong word, and what it is, they get the understanding that it's the blame is on some of the staff here, and the staff here are not to blame for this. This is an investment issue that's at the photo, and the staff in this building now and the people are the people who are going to help us remove this. So there is an issue between officers and members. I mentioned a full council. I think we're trying to change that. A change of this nature will take a long time, but we're bringing trust back into the selves here, myself and the rest, and the senior leadership team, and that what we've got. We're fixated day in, day out to try and to achieve, and that is one of the most important things we can do to do that. And I can only say the help that Essex senior officers, the help that people have helped with that, and the help here. I couldn't have done this job now in the last 3 months.
Leader, thank you.
Yeah.
A comment I will make, and I've probably made it several times over the last few weeks since I've been here, is that if members don't understand anything, there are no naughty questions. You need to be confident to be able to, A, challenge officers, and if you don't understand, get people to repeat it, And if you need more detailed briefings, you need to feel confident enough to ask. It's your responsibility. We are expecting a lot of you as professional officers. You're not professional in that respect, so if you don't understand, you are encouraged to ask. And if you don't think you're getting the answers in a way that you think is appropriate, you can always come to me and I will fight your corner to ensure you get that information. I know Jonathan is very committed to ensure you get it in a way that you understand. And I've said similar things, and I will say, to overview and scrutiny as well. Thank you.
Much appreciated. And it's a new regime and of a new style of working, and there is some senior staff in this area. Well, we're worried about what's happening, and we've got to make sure that's our job as community leaders and their job as the chief executive and the senior officer leadership team to do that. And I'm hoping we can get through and make sure that, because how we get over this is the staff in this building now. And thank you. With that, any other questions? And if I not, I will move. I'm looking for them online. Can I move to recommendations 1.1 to 1.10? Do we agree? All agree? Thank you. At that point, then, let's move. So there's no more questions, no more items for tonight. I close the meeting at 7:36. Thank you.